Our third lecture this week looks at sports fan communities. Not so much in terms of maybe motivations or identity related social interaction like we've talked about in our first couple, but actually the replacement of what used to be a physical community with the digital community or with sort of imagined communities of sports fans. So in the past, we had sort of a localized identity that's tied to a physical place. Um, Society had neighborhoods, parks, sidewalks, usually tied around schools or again specific neighborhoods, houses within a community, and local sports was one thing that brought the community together. Now, if the physical place that makes up the community is small enough, you could actually get to know most, if not all, of the members of the community. So if it's a small town in the Midwest, let's say 1,000 people in the town, over time of living there for years, perhaps, you would get to know everybody and know them pretty well and have a really good sense of community identity, your local identity. This might also be the case. You can make the argument that on a college campus, it might be, a small college especially, it might be a small enough community where you would know most of the members. It's probably not quite the same because obviously at college you're there for just 4 years. Some people are already seniors that are out the door when you come in as freshmen, so you might not get to know them as well. It's a very transient kind of place, as opposed to the physical small community that I just spoke of, maybe 1,000 people in the Midwest that have lived there for decades, really. So you have much more time and much more investment to get to know people. So as a lot of society is moving toward more of a suburb style where we don't know neighbors as well. We're not as involved in the physical place of the people around us as we congregate in larger and larger cities. It's impossible to actually know all of the members of a community. So we move away from this sort of local identity where we know all the members of our community, we know their values, know them personally, moving away from that toward perhaps digital communities, things like social media, where physical place gets shifted toward digital context. So it isn't necessarily the physical place that connects us, it's actually the relationships that we're maintaining through these various media channels. So there's a lot of this has been caused by the mobility of the working class. We move from place to place much more frequently than generations in the past. We're drawn to larger cities. And then even within those cities, we're broken out into suburbs, many of which are sort of without sidewalks, and you just have your house, and you don't necessarily connect with all the members of your community. So the community of Indianapolis, it's hard to argue that the city itself is a community, because certainly you wouldn't be able to get to know all of the members of the city. So then it moves towards what scholarship has called an imagined community. Now, in an imagined community, we think of maybe stereotypical Hoosiers or stereotypical residents in the city as a whole, and maybe sort of baseline values of hospitality or friendliness or openness or whatever the values of any given city might be. Virtually every region in America, except for maybe the East Coast and West Coast, talk about their hospitality. So we have Southern hospitality, Southwest hospitality, Midwest hospitality. And really all of this is getting at, again, back to this imagined community. We don't know all the members of our community if we have this sort of larger, even geographic space. But if once we go beyond that as well into sort of digital communities, it's impossible to necessarily know everybody. So really that's where the term imagined comes in, is that we are placing on all of these people these Midwestern values or Indianapolis values or Hoosier values. And what the reading does is that it extends the idea of imagined communities beyond sort of physical places or thought of places. So the United States, Americans are an imagined community where it'd be impossible to know every American, but we think there's sort of American values that we all hold. So it's taking that idea of an imagined community and applying it toward sports. So the fan base of the Boston Red Sox is an imagined community. They don't know all of each other, but they think that they all have sort of a similar value set or similar sort of priorities in life. So that's where we're extending this imagined communities from what was largely a sociological type of term about just communities that we think of in our mind about wherever we are in the world. So Indianapolis, Indiana, the United States, perhaps Western civilization. All of those are imagined communities, and they're extending that concept to sports. And the reason that these imagined communities, or just community in general, is so important to us is that as humans, we tend to want a sense of belonging. We want to fit in. So even if we don't necessarily come into contact with all the members of our community, we want to have at least the appearance or feeling that we're fitting in. We're all alike. We all have shared values. We all have the same expectations regarding behaviors and attitudes. And that is where we start playing it out back to our earlier lecture on identity performance, where we have this imagined community, where we have imagined values that everybody shares, imagined sort of norms of how people are supposed to act toward their team, toward a rival team. And there are norms about how fans should react to officials on the field, how they should react to a win, how they should react to a loss, what they should wear, how they should talk about their team. Just about anything that you can think of related to attitudes and behaviors, there's a norm for, and it all ties back to this sort of shared values that we think this fan base has. So examining various imagined communities of Indianapolis resident. So we have sort of this larger macro imagined community of American. Then other macro level would be a Midwesterner or a Hoosier. Underneath that, we probably have an Indianapolis resident, an NFL fan. So there's various sort of subsets of these imagined communities, and depending on whatever your context is that you're in, those are going to come to the front. So if you are at in a voting line, you might have sort of American values, or if you're just talking to a stranger in public, you might have sort of Midwesterner or Hoosier imagined community at the forefront of your mind. If you're attending a Colts game, you're going to be having this sort of NFL fan or Colts fan imagined community at the forefront of your mind. And there are also sort of further subgroups based on race, gender, sexual orientation. All of those as well could constitute an imagined community, since certainly you wouldn't know every member of the community. So this brings us to our second discussion item for the week: imagined communities. So two parts to it. So once I get through these, pause this video and then hop back over to your discussion post. Write in the discussion item 2. Answer 1, answer 2, then come back over to the lecture. So the first one, describe the various levels of imagined communities to which you belong. What are the values of each community? How do those values get passed or reinforced within the community? Second, which imagined communities are you a part of for which you have the least physical contact with other members? So this would be, again, really taking that imagined part and really blowing it out more. This would be example of a community that you think you're a part of, or you really feel strongly that you're a part of, but don't actually encounter many other members of. Describe that membership and how it might differ from other communities that you're a part of, imagined or physical communities that you're a part of. What's different about those? And again, what's different about those that have very little physical contact between members? So take a few minutes, pause this video now, and head over to your discussion post, write up these two answers, and then come back for the remainder of the lecture. Okay, all right, so let's take a look back into it. Hopefully you had a nice discussion post item. Coming back into the lecture, where this community part plays out in terms of our behaviors, a little bit more on that. So in general, we have the premise of humans desire social acceptance. So we look around our community, whether imagined, digital, physical community, whatever the type of community is, we look around to see how to fit in. Especially when we're very new to a community, we look around and we typically look at community leaders. So if there are maybe arriving at the arena, we look around at maybe certain fans that we could relate to or see as leaders. Sometimes the leaders are on the court itself. We have cheerleaders, we have the players or the participants in the game, we have coaches, we have any number of places that we look in the community to figure out how we need to act, how we need to operate. We are shown how real fans operate by just looking around. Sometimes this is in the actual arena. Sometimes this is a purely imagined real fan that we have to sort of pull ideas from other areas of life that, okay, the real fans that I've seen on TV do this, so that's what I'm going to do. So again, this gets us back to that idea of our identity presentations, trying to fit in what we're supposed to do, what we're supposed to not do, our values, how we're supposed to behave in the setting, whatever that setting might be, whether it's at the arena itself, at maybe a sports bar, or if it might even be in your own living room, how you're supposed to act in relation to the TV. The difficulty comes when we start to have exclusion as a part of sort of this imagined community values or expected behaviors, norms. So the exclusion example that was raised in the reading was the male community around sports fans. So the emphasis or the highest value is placed upon male fans over female fans. In general, I'm sure there are cases where some sports have a larger female fan base than a male fan base, but just as a sports as a whole, the community of fans typically focuses on male sort of dominance of the community. So the males are innately seen as, air quote, real fans, and females are typically having to sort of prove themselves over and over and over again that they are real fans or that they belong, that they're anything above sort of a casual or social fan. And how this sort of stereotypically male real fan operates, generally speaking, it excludes children from the fan base, it excludes women, or at least sort of relegates them to objects within the spectacle. So they are sideline reporters, cheerleaders, ring card girls, waitresses at the sports bar, but not sort of true participants, air quote, true participants in the same manner that the real fans are. They're sort of always in the periphery. They're not genuine fans, at least in the minds of the sort of imagined male sports community. And so this is one example of a sort of subtype within the community based on gender. Certainly there are other exclusionary communities based on any other demographic. So race, gender, sexual orientation, anything you can think of could be used as sort of an in-group, out-group type of separation. So to kind of wrap all of this up, what the imagined community or community in general does for us, it provides a safe place mentally. It's a place where we fit in, we know the values and the expectations of the community, we have a certain set of expected behaviors of how people are likely to react to anything. So we know the community, we know what's going to happen, and that gives us sort of a mental sort of safety net or a safe place to operate because we have a sense of unity. There's a distinct identity with the group that extends beyond the arena that we're in or beyond whatever setting that we're in. We know we belong to this group, especially when we're sort of really vested members of it and our identity is tied in with the community in a very sort of strong or powerful way. We know that it's going to remain regardless of where we go or what comes before us. And we typically signal to other members of our group that, hey, I belong. I wear a hat that has maybe Iowa Hawkeyes on it, so that way when I'm back in Iowa or anywhere in the world, if anybody sees me, they sort of recognize the Tiger Hawk on it. Sports fans for Butler might wear a Butler jersey. You might have a bumper sticker on the car so that if anybody sees it, they're sort of, oh, hey, that's a Butler fan. I'm a Butler fan. We have this sort of shared sense of values or this sort of shared experience that we can talk about and relate to each other, that we signal out. We send these signals out into the world, bumper stickers, hats, how we talk, what we talk about, the actions that we do. All of those are really signals to fellow members of our community that say, hey, I belong, I'm one of the good guys, so to speak. And again, back to what the reading was discussing, was that as our physical communities are weakened or threatened or shifted due to changes in technology, workforce dynamics, sort of the movement of people in society, imagined communities and imagined sports communities have taken greater significance. So we get these safe place sort of feelings, the sense of unity and belonging to a group. We get that less and less from our actual physical communities where we live, and we get it more and more from these imagined communities of maybe sports fans or any other type of imagined community.